I know it's been quite some time since I've actually just sat down and done an at-home video that didn't have anything to do with matches, but that's because I've been waiting to do something to actually finish out this rifle and one other one, which I'll make a separate video on at some point. But now I'm comfortable saying that I have done everything to this G3 that I wanted it to make it my ideal G3. It's not an ideal rifle, we'll get to that, but it is, I think, as good and as modern as you can make a G3 be with the current market of parts that are available for it. Now, you're seeing almost everything I did to it. I didn't do much to the internals of it, and that's just because I didn't want to sacrifice any of the reliability that the G3 has. I didn't go with a separate or the reduced locking wedge because I didn't want to fuss around with then having to deal with bolt gap. I'm not playing around with that. But I've been working on this project for almost a year. I got this rifle as a birthday gift to myself in beginning of June, right about the middle of June of last year. And I thought initially that I would be using it with just its iron sights and default furniture for a bit, just to kind of feel out, see if I like it. But I discovered very quickly that I did not like it that much in that configuration. It wasn't, not because it wasn't good, I just didn't enjoy it. It's not the same feeling I got when I had the FAL, because the FAL just in its stock configuration is wonderful and I love it, and I will keep shooting this thing for as long as I can in this configuration with nothing else on it. At some point I would like to do another modernization project for the FAL, but that will need to wait because I costed it out and it's going to run me a little under $3,000 probably. I don't want to spend that kind of cash right now on just a gee whiz kind of thing. So this is what we got for a FAL for the time being, and this is what we have for a G3 for the time being. So there's a lot, the G3 has a lot going for it. It's a very robust system. It's very hard to get wrong. Once it's set up, it will run until the end of time, and it's very difficult to kill it. As long as you're feeding it the right ammunition, it will just keep going and you can't break it. There's nothing that a soldier or anyone can fiddle with to make it stop working. It's very good for what it was meant to do. Now, what it was not meant to be was an enduring system. It was never meant to be adaptable. I mean, because they couldn't, people in the 50s, that when this thing was designed, couldn't have foreseen all of the additional accoutrements that people nowadays want to have on their guns. So things like optics, better ergonomics. The ergonomics really kill this thing, but we'll get to that. So there's a lot that you would need to change out to make this thing feel comfortable. And even in its stock configuration, the G3 is not great. The general placement of the safety, the mag changes are slow, the charging handle is in a weird place, and overall, the main Achilles heel of this rifle is its weight. It is, even in its issued guise, if you were to get one in Germany or Portugal or Sweden or wherever, this thing is going to be a lot heavier than an FAL. And I've done it no favors by making it actually even heavier than this. So the weight of the G3 is just a problem that is going to exist. It's not going away. But what we can do, since we know we're going to be dealing with weight, is give it some capabilities. So you see, I've given it an Eotech for the optic, and as well as a 5x magnifier. We've got 3 weight, we can get some distance out of it. I gave it a light, gave it a bipod, and as well as a couple other things. Now, the downside of that is that now this rifle is extremely heavy. When it's loaded in this configuration with a steel magazine loaded with 150 grain 308 it comes in at just shy of 15 pounds, which for a shoulder-fired infantry rifle is ungodly. And since I have a bayonet now, this is actually a Swedish AK-4 bayonet I got from the good folk over at Stockholm Vapenfabrik in Stockholm, funnily enough. It is now over 15 pounds, and it is a very awkward gun to carry that 15 pounds in. But even in its lightest configuration that I was willing to do with it, so leaving the light on, but removing the bipod, removing the magnifier, using an aluminum magazine, this thing still comes in at 13 pounds even, which is heavy by anyone's definition. But you kind of expect it with a 308 rifle, but any AR-10 that you get with these same advantages, with these same kinds of accessories, is going to weigh a lot less. Now, does that mean I think that this project was a failure? No, absolutely not. I used this for the last match at Topton, which was in April, and it performed pretty well. Initially, my zero was a bit off, but once I fixed that, this thing was able to hit pretty much wherever I aimed at it. The main limiting factor was me, because I was running on very limited sleep and not a lot of energy that whole day. So having to hold this thing up on that amount of sleep didn't do me any favors, especially because there was a lot of offhand shooting. And now with that out of the way, I'll go through exactly all of the components I chose to do for this rifle to make it the way it looks. Kind of the basis for this you can call it an AK-4C, even though a lot of the stuff on here, aside from the Spuhr furniture, which I'm using, is not what they would use in Sweden. If you look at a lot of pictures of guys using AK-4Cs, they oftentimes don't have the Spuhr handguards, they just have the stocks, and they'll have an aimpoint comp M4 or M4S, I'm not entirely sure which, but that's pretty much the extent of it. I took this a little bit farther with this because I wanted to have a bit more accessories and a bit more capability on it, such as a light for shooting at night. So I'll bring in the camera real quick, a lot closer, so that I can show you all the individual pieces that I attached to this gun to make it, take it from a government issue G3 to what it is here, what I think is the quote-unquote ideal G3. So I'm going to start at the back here, and probably the most visually distinctive part that is on this rifle is the Spuhr stock. This is a very popular accessory. A lot of people will go on about how it makes the recoil in line with the travel of the bolt, which it certainly does. That's just visually obvious. It does prevent you from using the iron sights, which they're vestigial at this point. And people will say that the inline recoil helps to reduce the recoil and just make the gun more controllable in general. And I can say from experience that that is absolutely true. The regular stock is quite long. You do have your face in kind of a weird position where the hump is, and having the recoil inline does in fact make it more controllable. That is not internet speculation, that's not myth, that is absolutely true. It does, whoops, that's the bipod going. It does actually make it much more comfortable to shoot. Now, the one criticism I do have of this stock, other than its price, is the lack of a rubber butt pad. Now, it does have holes in the back, screw holes, with threaded inserts. And from what I've read, the idea was Spuhr was developing a rubber pad that would go on the back here, whether to act as just anti-slip or as actual recoil absorption, I'm not sure. But apparently the Swedish government didn't want that, and so the idea was just dropped and they were never produced, which is a shame. I've seen pictures of people putting slip-on limb savers on these. Apparently that works, but I think it looks a bit goofy, so I opted not to do it. The cheek riser on these is interchangeable, so you can get different height ones for wherever your optic setup is. I just left it as a standard one because it's perfectly fine for the optic setup that I have. It is adjustable out to quite a long length of pull. This is very uncomfortable. Because of the eye relief of the Eotech magnifier that I'm using, I sometimes opt to use it at 1, maybe even 2 clicks from fully collapse. When I'm shooting, especially when I'm using the thick support straps on my chest rig. I might run it fully collapsed. It just depends on the position that I'm taking and whether I'm using the magnifier or not. Since I'm using an Eotech, it doesn't have any eye relief. Doesn't matter at that point. It's just a matter of comfort. But I do find it with just one click out does make using the magnifier, because of its length and its eye relief, somewhat easier. Inside is something you actually can't see what I did. I replaced the stock buffer in this with a PSG-1 buffer. And what that does is it lengthens the whole buffer, and it also lengthens the piston that sticks out. So in case you're not familiar, G3s do have an internal buffer, so when the bolt carrier comes to the back, instead of just hitting a hard surface, it hits a piston with a coil spring behind it that decelerates it somewhat. Now, in the normal G3 buffers, that has a very stiff spring and the piston doesn't move very much. On the PSG-1 buffers, they have a longer piston and also a longer travel, so that with a lighter spring. So that helps decelerate the bolt carrier slower and reduces the recoil impulse somewhat. Now you can also get HK21 buffers, which is the machine gun buffer that theoretically would decrease the recoil even more. However, they also cost about twice as much as the PSG-1 buffer, and I wasn't entirely sure that they would fit in the Spuhr stock. I seem to find stuff online going both ways, and I wasn't entirely sure, so I didn't want to spend $220 to risk that. So this just has a PSG-1 buffer in it, which does fit quite comfortably inside the Spuhr stock. The end cap is the same. Not many people realize this, but when you get the Spuhr stock, it's just the stock and the buffer tube assembly inside. You reuse the stock rifle's end cap, and you remove whatever end cap you had on there before. So if you had a fixed black or green GI stock, you take that off and reuse the end cap. The buffer goes in here as well. So the next thing is the whole lower assembly of this. Now, I basically took everything out of the lower part of this gun. Everything is replaced except for one piece, and that is the ejector and its spring and its pin. So what's going on here? Well, what I have here is the Magpul grip module, because I was originally planning to just use the black plastic one that it came with, but I found that the grip in the back comes to a rather uncomfortably sharp point, and I didn't really like that. So I got the Magpul one. It's a lot squarer and flatter in the back, so you get a lot more broad contact with the palm of your hand, so it's a lot more comfortable under recoil. You also notice that I have an ambidextrous safety on it, which is from HK Parts. I opted not to get the Magpul one because, from what I've heard, it uses the same method for retaining or indexing the safety, which is just a flat spring with a divot in it. This actually has a coil spring and a plunger, so it's a lot more positive when it clicks into place. And also I'm using the grip cord to store an extra 2 CR123 batteries, which are for the optic and potentially the light, which we'll get to in a bit. Probably the biggest upgrade that I did to the lower was I replaced the trigger. You notice the trigger bow here does not resemble the normal G3 trigger. It's quite a bit thinner. That's because this is a Timney trigger. I went with Timney over the Heckfire trigger, which you've probably heard of, because this, unlike the Heckfire, will allow you to use aftermarket safeties. For the Heckfire trigger, you have to use their safety lever that it comes with, and I wanted to have more options than that. Now, this is still an excellent trigger. I'll show you that it is, in fact. Whoops, I have a drink that I don't want to spill. Sorry, the table is very wobbly, but the gun is empty. You'll see has a very short travel, has a little bit of take up, and not very long reset, but a very clean and a light break, which I very much appreciate, and it does make shooting this thing accurately at distance a heck of a lot easier. Not impossible. I've shot Mosins at distance before with very awful triggers, but this definitely makes everything a whole lot easier, and since we're going for upgrading, why not upgrade that as well? The magazines are not anything special. This is a steel magazine that was made by Rein in October 1962, in case you weren't aware. I've been looking for, actually, Swedish steel magazines. I've never been able to find any, so if you have a line on one, drop it in the comments. But the magazines for these things are still cheap. There's nothing wrong with them. I wouldn't even advise you get the KCI ones. I've seen one out in the wild that a guy was shooting through sent me, and it didn't present high enough to actually feed reliably. So just get the surplus ones. Yeah, they're all from the 60s and 70s, but that doesn't matter. They all work fine. I've never had a problem with one. Going through here, like I said, internally, I didn't do anything with the bolt, so we're not going to talk about that. But what I did do was I put optics on top of it, which you see here. This is a pair of Eotechs. I have an EXPS-2, I'm sorry. Sometimes they take me a bit to remember the model numbers. So this does not have the night vision settings, costs a little bit less, but it does have the quick detach mount and it does have the side mounted controls. And I paired it with their G45 5X magnifier. I had the opportunity to look through a G33, which is their full-size 3X magnifier, and I quite liked the glass clarity, so I said, well, I'll get one of them as well. Before I was using the Vortex Micro 3X, and that has been my workhorse for quite some time, but I wanted a little bit more magnification with this in case I ever decide to try and take it out a bit further to like 500 yards or so. So I am debating getting a different Eotech with a 2-dot reticle, because this is just the 1-dot, so that would make this the EXPS-2-0. Because I like the donut and dot reticle. I have that on my stop mod clone as well, and it's very nice reticle. I like Eotechs. But for the purposes of this, if I want to shoot out to extended distance, you don't have any sort of other indexing points in the reticle. I mean, the other solution would be to get an LPVO or an MPVO if I was going to shoot a distance, but that's not the primary goal of this rifle, so that's the reason I went with this setup. And also I can take the magnifier off and move it around to different guns, which I have actually been doing. It's going to go on the SOT mod for when I use it. Spoiler alert for Welsh Mountain in June. Now, you may notice that it's sitting very, very close to it. That is because if I were to move this thing further back, I would have to extend the stock a lot because of where the eye box is on these. Magnifiers have famously bad eye boxes, and this is no exception. So I put it all the way forward so I can have my face comfortably forward and not have the stock out a mile away from the end of the gun. So that's why this is where it is. Moving on to the front end of the gun, I have fitted this G3 with an extended HK21 charging handle, which I will say is probably the biggest, after the trigger, the biggest quality of life improvement to this gun. It makes charging the gun and locking it open a heck of a lot easier. It makes doing the slap or the grab, whatever you do, also a lot easier, and it provides you more leverage at the stock charging handle, which only comes out to like here-ish. It just doesn't do. It's also wider, so it's a lot more comfortable to grab. I also have a HK parts reproduction of the HK vertical grip, so you would twist this knob to actually lock it in place, and it mounts to a small piece of Picatinny that's right here on the Spuhr handguard, which we'll get to in a second. And I used the vertical grip. I was originally planning on using an angle grip, which is what I've used previously on a lot of guns, but because of the weight of this thing, I'm having to hold it relatively close to the receiver, and when you have when you're dealing with weight like that, it's treating it kind of like a short hand guard. And with the angle of this, it puts my wrist at a quite comfortable angle. So that's why I've gravitated towards this. And you'll see it on some of my other guns, like the Bren 2 is set up the same way, my VZ58 and 223 is set up the same way. So that's why this is there. Now, probably the other elephant in the room that you're noticing is I actually do also have, in addition to the Spuhr stock, the Spuhr handguard. And they advertise this as being actually lighter than the stock plastic handguard, which I can kind of agree. It's just machined from a piece of billet aluminum. It has a ton of these lightning and venting holes in them. It's a very nice, it's a very well-made handguard. It's still free-floated. Not many people know this, but G3s from the factory are all free-floated. And you can see, if I can, yeah. I'm bending the barrel, but the handguard doesn't move. So likewise, if I bend the handguard, the barrel doesn't move. The front sight block is not attached to the cocking handle tube in any way, which is how it can do that. The downside of the Spuhr handguard, there are two. One is just the cost of the handguard itself. It is a very expensive handguard, and you can only get it from one place, which is Mile High Shooting, which they're good folk. You should check them out. And then the other thing, the big thing really, is the proprietary rail sections. This uses Spuhr's proprietary attachment system, and they sell a bunch of stuff, but it's primarily oriented towards precision rifle shooting out to extreme distance. So a lot of the stuff for that doesn't really apply to the use case of this rifle. And what you really want are Picatinny rail sections. And unfortunately, those rail sections are quite expensive. They do offer them in different lengths, which is nice. You can get, I believe it's 3, 5, and 9 slot sections for them. And they attach with M10, I believe M10's countersunk screws to these holes. Now, these holes are recessed and they're very well protected, and once stuff is mounted here, it's quite rigid. So you can use just the rail sections that you want and attach stuff just where you need it so that the rest of this is unused. That is a better alternative to, say, a tri-rail system, and I believe this is even lighter than even an M-LOK system, but an M-LOK is going to give you more options for mounting stuff than this is for a lot less cost, because it's not just the cost of the handguard, it's also the cost of these pick rail segments. But for what they are, I really like them. It's very nice. Now, moving just forward of that, we have a Harris bipod, which is not the QD one. I did want to be able to remove it, but being able to remove it very quickly was not that huge a priority for me. So I got the one that just has a thumb screw. I also have the throw lever on here for tightening it down. They normally just come with a knob, which is very difficult to actually get tight. So then the rifle won't have as much pivot. But this lever is a big help with that, and it's pretty easy to install. I did actually use this at the Topton match, and it was helpful on the long range. Not much outside of that. The one where you showed me shooting through the port, I don't think I really needed it for that, but it was just nice. Now, the other thing, big thing on here is the light. So this is a Cloud Legacy body with their Rein 3 head. The big thing with the Legacy is that unlike the normal Rein 3 bodies, you can actually attach Surefire compatible tail caps to these. So I have a UE here and an SR-07 tape switch on the other side. And that's because it falls right under my thumb, and whoops, that's bright. So I can have both constant on and momentary, which is very nice. And I have it on this side, so I don't need the DS-07. May upgrade to it at some point, depending on how the UE holds up. So far, it's doing all right. I really like the Rein 3 heads. They're very powerful. They have a lot of throw. And folks at Cloud are good eggs. But I think if they can make this in an 18350 size, if you guys are listening, that would be a killer product. And I would put that probably on my Scorpion Evo carbine, which has a PLH V2 head on it right now, which is also a good light, but this would be a lot more powerful. And I have it on an Arisaka inline side mount for Picatinny because I have this bayonet for it, which I paid a not insignificant amount of money for. I mean, it was still relatively inexpensive, even compared to the G3 bayonets that are getting imported, the German ones. This mounts the same way that those do, but it has the latch in a different position. Normally the German G3 bayonets have the latch at the 9 o'clock position. This is like 10 o'clock, and I actually screwed it up a bit because it's not a perfect 45 degrees from the mounting screw that is in the bayonet adapter, which you can't see, but it's installed here. So I had to get the Dremel out, Gunsmith's best friend, to Dremel out the hole I drilled so that I can actually mount, oops, rifle's falling over, can mount the bayonet to it. This is an interesting bayonet in its own right. I may make a separate video on it, but for now, that is the Swedish specific G3 bayonet. Okay, I have the stock flash hider on here. It's fine, I don't need to mess with it. There's one more thing I wanted, actually, excuse me, two more things I wanted to show, which is, both have to do with the sling. Move the bayonet out of the way. Collapse the bipod. So, another one of those pricey Spuhr accessories is the sling mount. It comes with both a QD socket and just a general loop that you can use for either HK hooks or what you see here, just a piece of paracord. And I did it this way because the sling I'm using, which I'll explain in a moment, has paracord at both ends, and the Spuhr stock has an HK hook sling plate at the rear. So it just works out that both of those would get used. I, at first, was just using the standard sling loop that is in the front sight tower, but this is actually fixed to the barrel, so any kind of tension on the sling is going to deflect the barrel, and I didn't want that. So this mounts to the handguard, directly to the Spuhr handguard, so it doesn't cause any deflection, which is nice. Now, and finally, the sling I'm using is from Manticore arms, and mainly the reason I got this because it's in the M90 Swedish splinter camo, which I think is rad. I have a bunch of it. It's really cool, and to my surprise, it's actually a very nice sling. You have this buckle here, which you can use to pull on it to extend it, but also a great big loop, which is this works better when it's actually around your body. There we go. Which tightens up very nicely. When this is actually on your body, it's a lot smoother than I just made it look, but it's a nice thing. The only complaint is that it's only 1 inch wide. With a gun this heavy, you really want something that's 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches. 1.25 inches at a minimum, but this is really only a problem for me because I was carrying it for 2 days straight, and you really start to feel every pound of that 15 pounds by the end of it. But with that concluded, that is my take on modernizing the G3. So I hope that was interesting. I certainly had a lot of fun putting this together, and it was a lot of fun to use, even though it was kind of physically exhausting to use. I'll definitely be doing it again. I haven't given up on this thing. It performed exactly the way I wanted it to, weight aside, but it's accurate enough. I have been planning on using this for a gas gun match, so I've been playing around with different bullet weights for it. It's got a 1 in 10 barrel. It's not a precision barrel. It's not a bull barrel, not heavy or anything like that. But I wanted to put some match ammo through it to see what it could do, and I get a little under 2 MOA. I got the best results with 168 grain federal gold medal match. That seemed to perform the best, although it's pricey. So I've been experimenting with S&B 168 hollow point boat tails. Those seem to also perform not as good as the gold medal match, but still satisfactory. It's still just a hair under 2 MOA. So with that out of the way, look forward to seeing more content with this. I will certainly be doing my best to get it out. Main obstacle to that is that not every match director or every range will allow you to shoot 308 for a competition, so I just got to work around that. Doing my best to find places, but it's kind of slim pickings. Still, doing my best, and thank you for watching. I'll have another video up at some point about the VZ58 because I did a similar process with it with my 5561. Spoiler alert. And yep, that's all I got for today. Thanks again for watching.